Outpost Halvern was not a pretty place. It floated in deep space like a broken tooth, old, gray, and held together with cheap welds and stubbornness. The station had no single owner, no single law. It belonged to every species, and therefore to none of them. Traders came here to sell things they couldn't sell anywhere else. Criminals came here to hide. Diplomats came here when they didn't want anyone to know they were talking. And Do-hyun came here because he had nowhere else to go. He stepped off the transport ship with a bag over one shoulder and a scar across his jaw that hadn't been there 2 years ago. He was tall for a human, broad across the shoulders, with short dark hair and eyes that looked at everything the same way. Calm, steady, like nothing in the world could surprise him anymore. He wore old military boots, worn down at the heels. His jacket had no markings on it. He had taken them off himself the day he was discharged. The discharge hadn't been clean. There was no handshake, no thank you, no small pension waiting for him. Just a document, a stamp, and a door shown to him with cold efficiency. The charge was disobeying a direct order during an active conflict zone. What the document didn't say was that the order had been to leave a group of 47 refugees behind in a burning settlement so that the battalion could move faster. Do-hyun had refused. He had stayed, organized the evacuation, and gotten every single one of those people out alive. He had also missed the strategic objective by 11 hours. The Earth Defense Corps did not care about the 47 people. They cared about the 11 hours. So now Do-hyun was here, on a station at the edge of nothing, having answered a job posting for a security guard position that paid just enough to eat and sleep. It was not a glorious next chapter. But Do-hyun had never been looking for glory. He had only ever been looking for something worth doing. He found Taeyong waiting for him near the docking gate. Taeyong was shorter than Do-hyun, with a round face and warm eyes that smiled before his mouth did. They had served together for 3 years before Taeyong left the Corps and moved into diplomatic work. He was good at it. Good at listening, good at saying the right thing at the right time, good at making different species feel like they were understood. It was a skill Do-hyun respected deeply and did not possess at all. "You look terrible," Taeyong said. "I look fine," Do-hyun said. "Your boots are falling apart." "They still work." Taeyong shook his head and took the bag from Do-hyun's shoulder without asking. They walked together through the station's main corridor, past stalls selling food that smelled strange and good, past groups of aliens that moved aside without thinking, past the low hum of the station's aging air recyclers that kept everyone breathing. Taeyong talked while they walked. He filled Do-hyun in on the station's current mood, which was tense. 2 days ago, a Velshari royal vessel had docked at Halvern. This was not a normal thing. The Velshari did not travel to neutral stations. They did not mix with other species unless they had a reason. They were one of the oldest empires in the known galaxy, and their sorceress caste, the women born with the power to shape energy with their hands and their will, were considered by most species to be the closest thing to gods that actually existed. "They haven't told anyone why they're here," Taeyong said. "Their ship docked, a small group came aboard, and they've been in their private quarters ever since. Everyone is being very careful not to look at them directly." "Smart," Do-hyun said. "I just want you to stay out of it," Taeyong said. He stopped walking and looked at Do-hyun with the kind of look that said this was not a casual request. "Whatever is happening with them, it is not our business. You have a job here, a simple job, and I would like you to keep it." Do-hyun met his eyes. "I'm not looking for trouble." "You never are," Taeyong said. "It just finds you." Do-hyun let the subject go. He settled into his post, learned the shift rotations, and spent his first 2 days doing exactly what the job required, walking the corridors, watching for problems, nodding at traders and travelers, and keeping his mouth shut. It was quiet work. He didn't mind quiet. On the third day, he was walking the east corridor near the docking rings, when he heard the sound. It was not a loud sound. That was what made him stop. It was soft, a sharp breath, cut short, like someone trying very hard not to make noise while something was going wrong. Do-hyun had heard that sound before, in field medic training, and in real situations he didn't like to think about. It was the sound of someone in pain trying to hold themselves together. He turned the corner. She was standing against the wall, one hand pressed flat against it, the other pressed against her chest. She was tall, taller than him, with pale silver-blue skin and hair that was deep black and moved slightly even though there was no wind, as if it had a life of its own. Her eyes, when they met his, were violet, and they were frightened, though she was clearly fighting very hard not to show it. She was wearing robes that marked her status clearly to anyone who knew the Velshari, deep red and gold, layered with symbols that meant power and bloodline and rank. Around her fingers, thin lines of light flickered and went dark, like a fire running out of fuel. Her silver blood was on the floor. Do-hyun did not stop to think about it. He crossed the corridor in 4 steps, put one hand under her arm to keep her from falling, and said, in a calm and even voice, "I've got you. Don't move fast." The corridor was not empty. There were 3 other species nearby: a Grethian merchant, 2 Sorvak travelers, and a maintenance worker of a species Do-hyun didn't recognize. Every single one of them had gone completely still. Not one of them had moved toward her. That was fine. He had. She tried to pull away from him. Her voice, when it came, was low and sharp, and had an accent like nothing he had ever heard. Clipped consonants and long vowels, like every word had been practiced to sound powerful. "Release me. You do not touch a Velshari." "You're bleeding," he said simply. She saw the silver on the floor. The flicker of light around her fingers went out completely, just for a moment, and he felt her weight shift against his arm, as her knees softened. He held her up. "I'm going to call the medical bay," he said. "Just stay still." She didn't argue again. He could feel her trembling, not from fear, he thought, but from effort. She was using every piece of herself just to stay conscious. Whatever was happening to her, it had been happening for a while. She had just been hiding it. Within minutes, her handmaiden Nari came running from the docking ring, followed by 2 Velshari guards who looked like they wanted to destroy him for touching their princess. Do-hyun stepped back and let them take her, his hands open and still, his face showing nothing. Nari looked at him. Her eyes were sharp and dark and deeply suspicious. "You are the one who caught her?" she asked. Then she turned without another word and followed her princess. The crowd in the corridor slowly began to move again. The Grethian merchant pretended it had all been very normal. The Sorvak travelers walked away quickly. Do-hyun looked at the silver on the floor. He didn't know what was wrong with her. He didn't know her name yet. He didn't know anything about the Velshari beyond what most people knew, that they were powerful, proud, and did not need help from anyone. But he had seen the flicker of light go out in her hands, and he had seen the fear behind her violet eyes. He went back to his post and said nothing to anyone. But that night, when his shift ended, he didn't go back to his quarters. He sat in the corridor near the medical bay, back against the wall, arms resting on his knees, and he stayed there until morning. Nobody asked him why. He wouldn't have known how to explain it anyway. The medical bay at Halvern was not built for Velshari. That was the first problem. The equipment was designed for 7 different species, and Velshari were not one of them. The station's only doctor, a tired Grethian named Asiv, stood in front of his own machines with a look on his face that said he was deeply unhappy about this situation and had no idea what to do about it. The Velshari healers who came from their ship were not much better off. They worked in pairs, moving their hands slowly over Ara's body as she lay still on the medical bed, their eyes closed and their faces tight with concentration. They spoke to each other in low, fast Velshari that nobody outside their group understood. Whatever they were finding, it was not good. That much was clear from the way their hands kept stopping mid-motion, like musicians who had hit a note that didn't belong in the song. Nari stood in the corner and watched all of it, with her arms crossed and her jaw set. She had been Ara's handmaiden since they were both young. She knew Ara's face better than almost anyone, knew the exact shape of her expressions, knew the difference between the princess's public face and her real one. Right now, Ara's real face was showing through. Even lying down, even weakened, she held herself still and proud. But Nari could see the pale lines around her mouth, the tightness at the corners of her eyes, the way her fingers pressed flat against the bed to keep from shaking. Ara was scared. She just would not let it reach her face. The lead healer, an older woman with gray-streaked hair, finally stepped back from the bed and spoke quietly to Nari. The diagnosis was not something that had a clean name. What she described was something Nari had only heard of in old stories. A soul-binding curse. An ancient and illegal form of dark magic. One that attached itself to the life force of a Velshari and fed on it slowly, like something draining a river, one cup at a time. It would take weeks, maybe a month, but the end of it was not in question. Without intervention, Ara would die. The healer said they did not know how to remove it. She said this quietly, and with great difficulty, because for a Velshari to say they could not do something was close to saying the world had stopped making sense. Their magic was the foundation of their identity. To have it fail them now, in this moment, in this place, with their princess lying still and pale on a foreign medical bed, it was a kind of shame that sat in the chest and didn't move. Nari thanked her and said nothing else. She did not sleep that night. She sat outside Ara's room and thought about who could have done this, and when, and how, and what came next. The list of enemies was not short. Ara was the first daughter of the imperial line, and the throne was not a simple thing. There were always people who wanted it. There were always people who thought they could take it if the right obstacle was removed. She was still sitting there in the morning when she noticed the human. He was not a new addition to the corridor. She remembered him vaguely from the previous evening, sitting against the opposite wall with a stillness that had struck her as odd. Now he was there again, or perhaps still there. It was hard to tell. He was leaning back against the wall, arms resting on his knees, eyes open, watching the corridor with the quiet attention of someone who had spent a long time in situations where watching carefully kept people alive. He was not staring at Ara's door. He was just present, alert, awake. Nari watched him for a while. Then she got up and stood in front of him. "You are the security guard," she said, "the one who caught her." He looked up at her. "Yes." "You are not assigned to this section," she said. It was not a question. She had already checked. "No," he agreed. "Then why are you here?" He thought about it for a moment, as if searching for the right words rather than thinking up an excuse. "I wanted to know she was all right," he said. Nari studied him the way she studied everything, closely and without softening her expression. He held her gaze without flinching, which already put him ahead of most people. There was no performance in his face, no attempt to look noble or impressive. He just looked tired and honest. She told him the princess was stable, but in serious condition. She said it because something made her feel it was true information, rather than a gift she was giving him. She went back inside. It was Rena who changed things. Rena was the station's xenobiologist, a small human woman with wire-frame glasses she wore out of habit rather than need, and a habit of thinking out loud that made her unpopular in meetings, but very useful in crises. She had heard about the Velshari princess through the station's gossip channels, which spread information faster than any official communication system. And she had come to the medical bay with a data tablet under her arm, and an expression of focused curiosity. Osif nearly turned her away. Nari very nearly had her removed. But Rena asked one question that stopped everyone. "Can I see the energy readings for when she collapsed?" The Velshari healers looked at her the way one might look at a child asking to fly a starship. But the readings existed, because Osif had run them automatically when Era was brought in. And Rena, who had spent 11 years studying the biology and energy signatures of 30 different species, sat down with those readings and did not look up for 2 hours. What she found was not magic. It was biology. The curse operated through Ara's nervous system. It had attached itself to the electrical signals that Velshari sorceresses used to channel power, and it was feeding on them like a parasite. It was ancient technology or ancient magic. The line between the two was never very clean, but the pattern it left was readable, measurable, and Rena had seen something like it before, not in a Velshari, but in a deep-sea creature from one of the ocean moons of Drevath IV, which used a similar mechanism to drain energy from prey. She explained this to Nari in simple, direct language. Nari listened. The Velshari healers listened, with expressions that moved from disbelief to reluctant attention. Rena was careful to say that she hadn't found the cure, but she had found a map of the problem. And a map, she said, was always the beginning. Nari allowed her to continue working. That evening, Dojun was still at his unofficial post in the corridor when Nari came out of the medical bay and stopped in front of him again. She looked at him for a long moment. "The princess will receive visitors tomorrow," she said. 5 minutes. I am telling you because you caught her when she fell, and the Velshari do not forget a debt." "I didn't do it for a debt," he said. "I know," she said. "That is why I am telling you." She went back inside. Do-hyun sat for a while longer in the quiet corridor. He thought about Bora, the way he always did in quiet moments. His sister, younger than him by 4 years, who had gotten sick during the 3rd year of the outer colony expansion. The treatment she needed had existed. It was not experimental or rare. It just hadn't reached her colony in time, because the supply chains prioritized larger populations. By the time it arrived, it was 3 weeks too late. Nobody had been punished. Nobody had been blamed. She had simply been a person in a place that was not important enough to save in time. He thought about the flickering light around Ara's fingers going out. He thought about the fear in her violet eyes that she had tried so hard to keep off her face. He didn't know her. He didn't know her world or her people, or why she was here. He only knew that she was someone fighting very hard to hold on, and that nobody on this station had moved toward her when she fell. He had moved. He would keep moving. That was the only thing he knew how to do. The archives at Halvern were not impressive. 3 small rooms, stacked floor to ceiling with old data cores, printed documents from species that no longer existed, and boxes of things that had been left behind by travelers who never came back. Most of it was junk. But Halvern had been operating for over 200 years, and in 200 years, even a place of junk collected things of value if you knew how to look. Rena knew how to look. She had been in the archive room for 14 hours when Do-Yun found her. She was sitting cross-legged on the floor, with 3 data tablets lit up around her, a cold cup of something that was supposed to be coffee on her left, and a look on her face that meant she was very close to something and did not want to be interrupted. Do-Yun set a fresh hot drink beside the cold one, and sat down against the wall nearby, without saying anything. Rena glanced at him, then back at her screens. She had decided she liked him in the first 10 minutes of knowing him, specifically because he did not ask unnecessary questions. I found it, she said, after another 20 minutes. Do-hyun looked at her. She turned one of the tablets toward him. On the screen was an old text, translated badly into common tongue, with diagrams on the side that looked like they had been drawn by hand and then scanned. Soul-binding curse, she said. Not a common term. Most species don't even believe it's real. The Velshari have records of it. Very old records, but they're classified, which means I found them by accident, in a cache of documents that someone clearly thought they had deleted 3 decades ago. What does it say? Do-hyun asked. Rina took a breath. It says the curse is placed intentionally. Someone has to do it on purpose, with specific knowledge of Velshari internal energy pathways. It's not something that happens by accident. Someone targeted her. Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. Then, someone who knows Velshari magic from the inside. Yes. Rina pulled up a second document. And there's more. The curse has a signature. Every sorcerer leaves one, like a fingerprint. The problem is that to read it, you need someone powerful enough to look that deep into Velshari energy patterns. She paused. But I don't need to read it that way, because the biological pattern left in her system matches a very specific style of old Velshari court magic. The kind that was practiced and taught in the Imperial Palace's inner sanctum for centuries. She let that land. Do-hyun leaned forward. Someone from her own court. Someone with access to her. Close enough and trusted enough to plant a curse without triggering her defenses. Rina folded her hands in her lap. She wouldn't have suspected someone she trusted completely. They brought this to Nari. The handmaiden listened without expression. She was very good at listening without expression. But when Rina finished speaking, Nari sat down on the edge of the nearest chair slowly, like her legs had decided to stop working properly, and she stared at the floor for a moment before she looked back up. Kova, she said. The word came out flat and cold, the way words did when they carried too much weight. Rina and Do-hyun waited. He is the court sorcerer, Nari said. He was Ara's teacher before he was her advisor. She trusted him since she was a child. She stopped. She pressed her hand flat on the table and breathed evenly. He has been pushing for a political restructuring of the imperial line for years, a way to install a puppet emperor, someone the old court faction could control. If Ara dies, the direct line breaks, and the succession falls to a much weaker claimant. Her eyes moved to the wall. He planned this before we left. The room was quiet. Rina was the one who spoke next. She kept her voice calm and practical, which was what the moment needed. There are only 2 ways to break this curse, she said. According to everything I've found, the first is for the person who placed it to willingly remove it. She looked at Nari. From what you're telling me, that seems unlikely. Nari made a short, humorless sound. Kova would sooner destroy himself. The second way, Rina continued, is a voluntary soul transfer. Someone else takes the curse into themselves. It lifts from Ara completely and binds to the new host instead. She stopped, and her voice dropped slightly. It doesn't break the curse, it moves it. The person who accepts it will carry it from that point forward. Nobody said what that meant. The curse fed on life force until there was none left. Whoever took it in would be dying from that moment on. Nari stood up and went back to Ara's room. She stayed inside for a long time. When she came out, she gathered the Velshari on the station, the guards, the healers, the ship's 2 senior officers, and she told them everything. Do-hyun stood in the corridor and watched through the open door as she spoke. He watched their faces. He was good at reading faces, even alien ones, after enough time. What he saw was guilt, then grief, then the particular stillness that came over people when they were being asked something they could not make themselves do. No one stepped forward. He understood it. He did not judge them for it. The soul bind would kill whoever accepted it. slowly, painfully, consuming the host's life force, the same way it had been consuming Ara's. It was not a call for bravery. It was a call for something closer to self-destruction. The fact that it would save their princess did not make the cost smaller. Taeyang found Douyin that evening, near the east corridor, standing at a viewport and looking out at the stars. "I know what you're thinking," Taeyang said. "You usually do," Douyin said. "I need you to not do it." Douyin looked at the stars. He had always liked looking at them, not for any poetic reason, just because there were a lot of them, and the vastness of the space between them made most problems feel the right size. Small. Manageable. "She's dying," he said. "She's an alien princess from a species that has never once shown any particular warmth toward humans," Taeyang said, and his voice was tight with something that was not cruelty, but fear. "She does not know you. You do not know her, and what you are thinking about would kill you." "Maybe," Douyin said. "Not maybe. The curse kills the host. That is what it does." Douyin was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Bora died because nobody decided she was worth the effort." Taeyang closed his eyes. "I'm not saying it has to be me," Douyin said, which was not quite true. "I'm saying someone has to do something, and I'm the only one in that corridor who's still thinking about it." Taeyang left, because there was nothing else to say. He had known Douyin long enough to recognize when a decision had already been made, and the conversation was just the echo of it. That night, Rena came to find Douyin with one more thing she had found. Her face was careful and controlled, which meant she had been sitting with this information for a while before deciding to share it. "There's something about human biology," she said. "I've been running numbers since I figured out how the curse works mechanically. The way it feeds, it targets life force through the nervous system. The stronger the nervous system's resistance, the slower the feeding process." She looked at him directly. "Human beings have an unusual combination of biological stubbornness and psychological resilience. We survive things we shouldn't. We hold on longer than we should. And our nervous system, our specific wiring, is not something the curse was designed for." He looked at her. "It would still kill a human," she said, making sure he understood that clearly. "I'm not saying it wouldn't. I'm saying it would take longer. And longer means a chance. If Ara is free and at full power, she might be able to find a way to break it completely before the curse finishes its work on a human host." She stopped. "I want to be honest with you. I don't know if that's true. It's a theory, not a promise." Douyin nodded slowly. "A theory," he repeated. "Yes," she said. She left. He stood in the corridor for a long time, thinking about theories and promises and the difference between them. He thought about the 47 people from the burning settlement, and the 11 hours, and the document with the stamp on it. He thought about Bora. He thought about a pair of violet eyes that had been frightened and had tried so hard not to be. Then he stopped thinking and started moving. That was, after all, what he was good at. She had never been still. Not really. Not since she was a child, learning her first channeling exercises in the palace's training halls. Not since her power had grown into something that moved through her like a second heartbeat. She was made for motion, for the sharp, clean feeling of magic running down her arms and out through her fingers, for the weight of decision and command, for the speed of action that came with knowing exactly what she was and exactly what she could do. Now she lay in a foreign medical bed in a foreign station, and she could not do anything. The curse did not hurt exactly. It was more like exhaustion, a deep, pulling tiredness that sat behind her eyes and in her chest, and made everything feel far away. Her power flickered when she reached for it. Sometimes it came, weak and thin. Sometimes it didn't come at all. For a Velshari sorceress, For a princess of the imperial line, there was nothing more frightening in the world than reaching for her power and finding empty air. She kept her face still. She kept her voice even. She kept herself dignified, because she did not have anything else left to keep. When Nari told her about Kova, she sat with that information for a long time. She turned it over. She looked at it from every angle, and then she put it in a place behind her eyes, where she kept the things she was not ready to feel yet. And she nodded, and she said, "We will deal with Kova when I am well." Nari had not argued. She knew better. The human guard came to see her the following morning. She had been told about his unofficial post in the corridor, that he had been sitting outside the medical bay through 2 nights, without being asked, without any instruction, without pay. Nari had told her this in the tone she used when she was reporting a fact, and also expressing a feeling about it simultaneously. Ara had listened and said nothing. He knocked on the doorframe and stood in the doorway without entering until she nodded. He was not what she had expected, and she realized she had been expecting something. She had constructed an idea of him from what Nari had described: a soldier, quiet, with a scar on his jaw and old boots. She had assumed a kind of roughness. What she got was something harder to name. He was very still, without being tense. His eyes moved around the room once, not suspiciously, just noting what was there, and then they settled on her and stayed there with a directness that was unusual. Most species, when they looked at a Velshari princess, either looked too much or looked away. He looked at her the way he might look at anyone. It was unexpectedly strange. She let the silence sit for a moment longer than was polite, because she was still a princess and old habits held. Then she said, "You are the one who stayed in the corridor." "Yes," he said. "Why?" She thought about this with the same considered pause she had already noticed. Not hesitation, but genuine thought. "I wasn't sure you'd be okay," he said. "I wanted to be nearby if you weren't." "You are a security guard on this station," she said. "That is not your responsibility." "No," he agreed, "it isn't." She studied him. There was nothing to gain from this for him. No status, no payment, no favor that a human security guard on a neutral station could realistically expect from a Velshari princess. She had been raised to understand motivation. It was a survival skill in imperial politics, and she could not find one that fit him neatly. "Nari tells me you were a soldier," she said. "I was," he said. "What happened?" He told her about the refugees, and the burning settlement, and the 11 hours. He told it simply, without drama, the way someone tells a story they have already made peace with. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "You lost your rank and your career," she said, "to save people who were not your responsibility." "Yes," he said. "And you consider this the correct choice?" "Yes," he said again. She looked at him carefully. "That seems irrational." He almost smiled. It didn't quite reach a full smile, just a slight shift at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe," he said. "We're like that sometimes." "Humans," she said. "Humans," he agreed. She asked him to come back the next day. She wasn't sure why. It came out of her mouth before she had fully decided it was what she wanted, which was unusual. She was not a person who said things before she decided them. But he nodded without making it a bigger moment than it was, and left, and she lay back against the pillow and stared at the ceiling. He came back. They talked in the way that people talk when they are both private people who are not used to talking, in short exchanges with long pauses in between that were not uncomfortable. She asked about Earth. He described it in practical terms: weather, geography, how dense the population was, how humans organized their settlements. She asked about the war he had served in, not the details of battles, but the feeling of it, and he was quiet for a long moment before he said it felt like trying to hold a door shut against something very large for a very long time, knowing that eventually you would get tired. She understood that. She understood it better than she wanted to. On the third visit, she asked him why he was really still here. Not the answer he had given her before. She believed that answer, but she had begun to feel there was more under it. He looked at the window for a moment. Then he told her about Bora. He kept it short. His sister, younger than him, a treatable illness, a supply chain that didn't move fast enough, the particular cruelty of dying from something that had a solution, just not one that arrived in time. Ara was quiet for a long time after that. "I am sorry," she said finally. It was not a phrase Velshari used often. Expressing sorrow to another was considered a kind of intimacy. But it came out naturally, and she did not take it back. He nodded. He didn't tell her it was fine, which she appreciated. Pretending it was fine was a small dishonesty she had always disliked. Outside the medical bay, Taeyong came to find Do-hyun between visits and begged him again. He said it with more emotion this time. Not anger, but the kind of fear that came from caring about someone for years and watching them walk towards something terrible with their eyes open. Do-hyun listened to all of it. He let Taeyong say everything he needed to say. Then he asked Taeyong to do one thing for him. "When this is over," he said, "send a message to my parents. Tell them I did something worth doing." Taeyong looked at him. His face moved through several things very quickly. "I hate you," he said, which was not even slightly true, and they both knew it. "I know," Do-hyun said. He told Ara, the next day, what he was going to do. He said it clearly and directly, the same way he said everything. No performance, no dramatics, just the information. Ara stared at him. Then she told him, in precise and certain terms, that she refused, that she would not allow it, that the soulbind would kill him, that it was not his curse to carry, and she would not carry the weight of his death on her conscience, and she would not accept this, and that was her final word. He sat down in the chair beside her bed and looked at her calmly. "All right," he said. She blinked. "All right? I have just told you." "You told me you won't allow it," he said. "I heard you." "Then, it's not your choice," he said simply. She had no answer for that immediately. She was accustomed to having authority over the people around her. She was accustomed to her words carrying the weight of finality. The fact that this human, this quiet, scarred, worn-booted human, who had no rank and no reason to be here, was sitting in her medical room, telling her that her refusal did not apply to him, was not something she had been prepared for. She wanted to be angry. She found that she couldn't quite get there. "You will die," she said. "Maybe," he said. "Rena thinks I might last long enough to matter. That is not a plan, that is a hope. Most plans start that way," he said. The light outside the viewport was dim and far away. Era looked at this human and felt something shift in her chest that she didn't have a good word for. She had power and rank and 1,000 years of imperial history in her blood, and this person, with old boots and a scar on his jaw, was sitting in a chair by her bed and preparing to carry her death so she could live. She was not sure she was supposed to. "You are very strange," she said quietly. "I've been told," he said. She did not argue again that night, but she did not sleep either. She lay in the dark and thought about the flickering light around her fingers, and the feel of her power coming back in small, weak waves, and the violet-edged question of whether a human stubbornness was really enough to hold a curse at bay. She thought about a girl named Bora who had not been saved in time, and she understood, finally, what was driving him. Not heroics, not honor, not some military code, just the unbearable memory of arriving too late, and the choice to never let that happen again if he could help it. She pressed her hand flat on the bed. She stared at the ceiling, and she began, very quietly, to think about how she might save him back. The ritual chamber was inside the Velshari ship. Do-hyun had not been inside the ship before. He walked through the docking corridor and into it the way he walked into most places, steadily, without slowing down. But the inside of the ship was something that made even his composed mind take a quiet moment. It was not built the way human ships were built. There was no harsh lighting, no exposed wiring, no practical gray walls. The Velshari built their spaces the way they understood the world, through energy. The walls gave off a low, warm glow that shifted slightly as he walked, as if the ship itself was aware of him. The floors were a dark material that absorbed sound. The air smelled faintly of something he couldn't name, something old and clean. The crew watched him as he walked. Do-hyun had been watched in many ways over the years. He had been watched by commanding officers assessing him for weakness. He had been watched by enemies looking for openings. He had been watched by people in burned settlements who were deciding whether to trust him with their lives. He knew how to read a watching crowd. This one was not hostile. It was something more complicated, a mixture of disbelief and a kind of careful attention, like they were watching something happen that was outside their understanding, and they were not yet sure what it meant. He understood that. He wasn't entirely sure what it meant either. The ritual chamber was at the center of the ship. It was circular, with high walls that curved inward at the top, and a floor marked with lines that had been laid there by hand long before this generation of Velshari was born. The lines were not decorative, they were functional, channels for energy, Rena had explained to him, paths that guided and focused power the way wires guided electricity. In the center of the circle was an open space. Nothing elaborate, just space. Nari stood against the far wall, with her arms folded, and her face showing nothing. Several of the ship's senior crew had come in and arranged themselves along the walls without being asked. Nobody had told them to be there. They had simply come. Ara was standing in the center of the chamber. She looked like herself again, for the first time since he had found her in the corridor. She was standing straight, wearing her full ceremonial robes, her hair moving with that slow wind that wasn't their quality that he had noticed early on. Her hands were at her sides. Her face was composed and still. But when her eyes found him across the chamber, he saw that the composure was not the same as calm. It was the kind of face that had been held together very deliberately. She had dressed for this. That told him something. He walked to the center of the room and stood a few feet from her. She looked at him for a moment, and then she said, quietly and precisely, "There is still time for you to leave." "I know," he said. "I have thought about this for 3 days," she said. "I have looked for another way. My healers have looked. Rena has looked. There is no other way." "I know," he said again. Her jaw tightened, just slightly. "You are a stubborn person." "I've been told," he said. She studied him with those violet eyes that had been frightened that first day, and that now held something harder to name, something that had grief in it and fury at the grief, and underneath both of those things, something she was not yet willing to call what it was. "I want you to know," she said carefully, "that if there is a way to undo this, if there is any path that leads to breaking the curse completely, I will find it. I will not stop looking." "I believe you," he said. She held his gaze. Then she turned to the healer and nodded. The healer spoke in Velshari, a low and steady stream of instruction directed at Ara. Do-hyun didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, a doctor's voice, precise and grounded, walking someone through a difficult procedure. He had heard that tone before. Ara closed her eyes. What happened next was not something Do-hyun could fully describe later. He would try, when people asked, and he would always land on the same inadequate words. It felt like pressure, and then cold, and then something very large, moving through a space that was not quite physical. The soulbind did not move gently. The ritual asked Ara to open herself, to drop the internal barriers that Velshari sorceresses built instinctively around their core energy. and he understood from the way her hands shook slightly that this was not a small thing. For a person whose power was her armor, her identity, and her inheritance, opening like that required a kind of courage that had nothing to do with battle. She opened. The curse came free. It hit Do-hyun like a wall. He was thrown backward, not dramatically, not like in training simulations, but in the way real physical force hit a real body. Sudden, total, and complete. He hit the floor of the chamber on one knee and one hand, and the impact went through both of them. And then everything went white. In the white, for just a second, he thought of Bora. Not with grief this time, just her face, the way she used to look when something was funny, which was often because she had found things funny easily, which had always been something he loved about her. Then the white faded, and the chamber came back. He was on the floor. His hands were pressed flat against the marked lines of the ritual space. There was blood on his face, from his eyes, he realized, which was alarming only for a moment, because he was already cataloging the rest of his body, and finding that most of it still worked. There was a deep, settled ache behind his sternum, low and constant, like something heavy had been placed there and fastened down. That was the curse. He could feel it. Not individual and specific, just present. A weight that was now his. He stood up. It took a moment. He needed the moment. He got up anyway. The chamber was absolutely silent. Ara was standing with both hands over her mouth. Her eyes were wide. Light was moving across her fingers and up her arms. Real, strong, full light the way it had looked before any of this, before the curse had begun to drain her. Her power was back. He could see it, even as someone with no ability to feel or use it. It was visible in the way she stood, the way the air around her moved, the way the glow from the walls responded to her presence. She was whole. She looked at him, and her eyes had the same expression they had when she had found him asleep in the corridor on the second morning, like she was trying to understand something that her experience had not prepared her for. He found that he was smiling. It happened before he decided to smile. Just a small one, honest and unplanned. It worked, he said. Her hands were still over her mouth. Nari, across the chamber, turned away. She turned away quickly, with a precise and deliberate motion, and she pressed the back of her hand against her mouth, and she stayed very still, facing the wall. Her shoulders were tight. She was not the kind of person who cried in front of others, and she was not going to start now, but the decision required effort. The senior crew along the walls did not move. They did not speak. They watched Do-hyun, this quiet human with blood on his face, now standing upright in the center of their ritual chamber with a death sentence embedded in his chest, smiling. And they had no words for what they were seeing. Their traditions had words for great sacrifice. They had stories about warriors who gave their lives for their people, their empire, their bloodline. None of those stories had prepared them for this. He was not Velshari. He had no empire. He had no obligation. He had no history with them, no debt to pay, no code that demanded this of him. He had done it because a woman was dying and he could do something about it. The lead healer moved to Do-hyun quickly, already reaching for her instruments, already cataloging what the transfer had done to his body. He let her check him over without complaint. The ache behind his sternum was steady and quiet. He knew what it was doing. He knew what it would keep doing, slowly, from this day forward. He thought about Rena's theory. Longer, she had said. Longer was enough. Ara came to stand in front of him when the healer stepped back. Up close, with her power fully restored, she was more than she had been in the medical bed, more present, more solid, more herself. She stood straight and tall, and the light moved around her, and she looked at him with her violet eyes, and she did not say anything for a long time. I will find a way, she said at last. Her voice was quiet and completely certain. I know, he said. She reached out and touched his arm, just briefly, the back of her fingers against his forearm, a gesture that one of the older crew members would later say was a form of acknowledgement reserved only for the closest of bonds in Velshari culture. Aura probably did not plan it. Some things did not wait to be planned. Do-hyun felt it, that brief touch, and he nodded once. Then she stepped back and became a princess again, because there was work to do. And Do-hyun rolled his shoulder and checked the weight of the ache in his chest, and found it manageable. He had carried heavier things. He would keep going. The first week, Do-hyun kept his job. He told himself it was because he needed something to do. That was partially true. The other part was that sitting still made the ache in his chest more noticeable, and moving made it easier to pretend it was just tiredness. The curse worked slowly, as Rena had predicted. Nothing dramatic. Nothing that put him on the floor the way it had put Era in the corridor on that first day. Just the deep, quiet, constant pull of something feeding. Like a wound that never fully closed. Rena checked him every morning. She had set up a routine. 20 minutes, her instruments, her tablet, her precise and gentle hands checking his readings. She never said more than what was accurate, which he appreciated. She told him the rate was slower than she had projected. She told him his nervous system was doing exactly what she thought it would, holding the line, pushing back, slowing the drain through sheer biological resistance. She told him this in a careful voice that kept the relief out of it, because she understood that slower was not the same as stopped. He thanked her every morning. She waved it off every morning. Taeyong came to sit with him in the evenings. He brought food, real food, not station rations, things he ordered in from the better traders who moved through Halvern. He sat with Do-hyun in his small quarters, and said very little, and ate with him, and that was enough. Some friendships operated mostly through presence. Theirs always had. On the fourth day, Ara sent for him. She was on the ship. Not in the medical bay anymore. She had returned to the royal quarters the morning after the ritual, and had been there since, working. When he entered, the difference from even 5 days ago was remarkable. She was standing at a large command surface covered in holographic displays, her power moving visibly around her hands as she worked through information at a speed that would have taken a team of analysts days. She had shed the ceremonial robes for something more functional. Still clearly Velshari, still clearly royal, but cut for movement and work. Her hair moved with that particular slow life of its own. She looked at him when he entered, and her eyes went immediately to his chest, as if she could see the curse there. She couldn't, not visibly, but he understood the instinct. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Fine," he said. She gave him a look that said she knew the difference between fine and fine. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She told him what she had been doing. The last 4 days had not been recovery for her. They had been action. She had been rebuilding contact with the Velshari court through encrypted channels, gathering evidence, pulling records and communications that she and Nari had known existed, but had never had reason to look for before. She had been careful and fast and thorough, and she now had something close to a complete record of Kova's political maneuvering over the past 3 years. Every alliance he had built, every message he had sent, every small corruption, and every large betrayal. She had prepared it all for a specific purpose. "I am going to contact him," she said. Do-hyun looked at her. "Directly," she said. "I want him to see me. I want him to understand that I know what he did, and that I am alive, and that I am coming." She paused. "And I want to give him one chance." "To lift the curse," Do-hyun said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. He thought about the kind of person who plants a death curse on a young woman they spent years teaching. He thought about what that kind of person would do when confronted with their failure. "He won't do it," he said. No, she agreed. But I want to give him the chance anyway. Because after I give him the chance and he refuses, what I do next will be something the entire court watches. And I want them to see that he was given every opportunity to choose differently. He looked at her for a moment. There was something in the way she had said all of this, the precision of it, the patience, that reminded him of the best officers he had ever served under, the ones who didn't act from anger, but from strategy, and were therefore considerably more dangerous. "All right," he said. She made the contact that evening. Do-hyun did not watch the transmission. He waited outside. But he heard about it afterward from Nari, who described it in short sentences with wide gaps between them, that told him it had been significant. Ara had appeared in Kova's private chambers as a light projection, at a distance of several light years, with the full force of her restored power evident in the quality of the projection. Sharp, detailed, completely real-looking, in a way that should have been technically impossible at that range. She had looked at her former teacher, and she had said in a voice that Nari said had been perfectly steady, that she knew what he had done. She had told him what evidence she held. She had told him who would receive it if he did not remove the curse from the human who now carried it. He had refused. What happened next, Nari described simply as, she showed him what she could do. The specifics were not things Nari went into in detail. What she said was that Kova's sanctum, the most heavily fortified private space in the Imperial Palace's inner section, took considerable damage, at range, through a projection, without Ara physically being anywhere near it. When the transmission ended, the Velshari court members who had been monitoring Kova's communications found that he had gone very quiet. Ara came back to where Do-hyun was waiting, and she looked tired in a way she hadn't looked since before the curse was lifted. Not physically tired, but the deep kind. The kind that came from doing something necessary that was also painful. He refused, Do-hyun said. Yes, she said. You expected that. Yes. She sat down for a moment, which she rarely did when she was fully powered and active. She looked at her hands. The light still moved across her fingers, steady, real, nothing like the flickering she had been reduced to before. I will return to the Empire. I will present the evidence to the court, and I will deal with Kova in full view of everyone who needs to see it. And the curse, he said. She looked at him directly. When Kova is stripped of his power and standing, when he has nothing left to protect, and no advantage left to hold, he will have no reason to refuse any more. She paused. And I will give him every reason in the world to comply. He nodded. She asked him how the ache was that day. He told her honestly, steady, manageable, lower than it had been yesterday. She filed that away without showing how much it mattered to her, though it was visible slightly in the way the light around her hands moved. He had started to notice that. The light responded to what she felt. It was like a second language, one she probably didn't know she was speaking. In the following days, she came to find him rather than sending Nari. She brought him updates, explained her plans, asked occasionally for his perspective on the human side of things, how certain communications would read to human diplomats, how Earth's governing bodies might respond to various shifts in Velshari political structure. He answered what he could. The conversations were always practical, but they grew longer somehow, each time. Nari noticed. She said nothing, but she noticed. Taeyong noticed too. He said something, which was more like him. He came to find Do-hyun one morning and stood in the corridor and said, I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. Do-hyun let him finish. Taeyong said, You are dying slowly. I know you know that. I know you're handling it the way you handle everything, which is by keeping your face steady, and moving forward and not letting anyone see the weight of it. And I know nothing I say will change what you did, or what is happening to you now. But I need you to know that I see it. And I think you should let someone else see it too. because you have spent your whole life carrying things alone, and it is going to run out of road eventually. Do-hyun was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "She knows." Taeyeon looked at him. "The princess?" "She sees it," Do-hyun said. "She doesn't pretend she doesn't." Taeyeon looked at him for a long time. Something moved across his face that was complicated and warm, and ultimately accepting. He nodded once. "Okay," he said. That night, Ara sat with Do-hyun by the viewport in the station's upper observation deck, and they looked out at the stars together. The station was quiet at this hour. The viewport was wide, and the stars were everywhere, thick and cold and far away. "Does it hurt?" she asked. "It aches," he said. "That's different." She was quiet. Then, "I want you to know something, not as a matter of debt or obligation, as a matter of truth." She looked at the stars. In the history of the Velshari Empire, there are records of sacrifices, warriors who gave everything, sorcerers who spent their lives to hold something important. I was raised on those stories. She paused. "None of them prepared me for you." He looked at her. "You are not doing this for empire or bloodline or glory," she said. "You are doing it because a person needed help, and you could help them." She turned to look at him. "That is the most extraordinary thing I have ever witnessed." He didn't know what to say to that. He looked back out at the stars. After a long moment he said, "Your people have a word for what I did." Nari mentioned it. "Vetheran," she said, "soul anchor." "What does it mean exactly?" She looked at him with her violet eyes, steady and clear. "It means the one who holds the line when everything else is failing," she said. "It means the one whose soul is strong enough to carry what others cannot." She paused. "It means we will not forget." He nodded slowly. Outside, the stars were very still and very far away, and the ache in his chest was there, as it always was, settled and quiet. And Do-hyun sat beside a woman who was alive because of what he had done. And he found that this, right here, in this moment, was enough. Whatever came next, this was enough. He had done something worth doing. Bora would have thought so too. The Velshari throne world was called Velan, and it had not seen a princess return from near death in 400 years. The last time it had happened, the event had been written into the imperial record in gold lettering and celebrated for a generation. Ceremonies had been held. Songs had been composed. The warrior who had made it possible had been given a name that was still spoken in the palace halls. This time, Ara returned not on a ceremonial vessel, but on the same ship she had left in. Quiet, fast, and with a data file in her hands that contained everything needed to end a man's power and freedom before sundown on the day she arrived. She did not announce herself. She did not call ahead for a welcoming ceremony. She walked through the palace gates with Nari at her shoulder and 2 guards who had been with her since Halvern. And she went directly to the imperial court chamber, and she opened the doors while a session was in progress. The room went completely silent. Kova was there. He was always there. Had been there for 30 years, positioned carefully in his seat on the advisory council, wearing the marks of his rank with the confidence of someone who believed the marks were permanent. When Ara walked in, his face did something complicated. It tried to stay composed and failed, just briefly, just for a second. And that second was enough. Several council members saw it. They filed it away. Ara stood in the center of the chamber, and she said, in the carrying voice she had practiced since childhood, "I am going to speak now, and when I am finished, this court will have everything it needs to understand what has been done, who did it, and what will happen next." She spoke for 40 minutes. She presented everything, the evidence of the curse, the evidence of Kova's political maneuvering, the communications he had sent, the alliances he had built, the plan he had put in place to remove her from the succession. She presented it clearly and in sequence, with references the court could verify independently, with the calm confidence of someone who had prepared this argument not from anger, but from certainty. When she was done, she looked at Kova. He was very still. "You have been given one chance already," she said, and the entire court knew she was referring to the transmission from Halvern, the details of which had already spread through the palace in the way that important things always did. "I am giving you a second. Not because I believe you deserve it, because there is a human on a space station carrying your curse in his body, and I would like you to lift it." Kova said nothing for a long moment. He looked at the council. He looked at the faces around him, the faces of people he had worked alongside and maneuvered around and cultivated relationships with for decades, and he saw that every one of them had already decided. He had miscalculated the margins. He had planned for Ara to die quietly, far from home, with no evidence and no witnesses capable of speaking in the right forums. She had come home. He refused anyway. It was pride, the last piece of it he had left. He stood up, and he said that the evidence was fabricated, and his position was lawful, and he would not be tried in this chamber by a girl who had been a child when he first took this seat. Ara looked at him for 3 seconds. Then she lifted her hand. What she did next lasted 9 seconds. The court records would later describe it as a display of focused high-tier Velshari channeled energy directed at a single target. What the people in the room described, in private, to their families and colleagues over dinner for years afterward, was something that looked like the air itself decided to disagree with Kova's position. His council seat buckled. The surface in front of him cracked down the middle. The rank marks on his robes went dark and cold, one by one, as if something in the fabric understood what was happening. He sat back down very quickly. "Your rank is removed," she said, in the same carrying voice, without raising it even slightly. "Your access to the palace and the court is removed. You will be held pending formal trial, and you will remove the soul bind from the human named Dohyun before you are taken from this chamber." He removed it. He did it the way a person did something they had no choice about, with shaking hands and a face that had gone past anger into something smaller. He performed the release ritual in front of the entire council, who watched in the particular silence of people witnessing the end of something that had seemed permanent. When it was done, Ara felt it, a distant, specific release, like a string being cut far away. She had been monitoring the connection since Halvern, aware always of the thread between Dohyun and the curse. Now it was gone. She breathed in. She breathed out. Nari, behind her, very quietly pressed the back of one finger against her eye, and then straightened her expression into something professional. On Outpost Halvern, in the medical bay, where Rena had been monitoring Dohyun since morning, the readings changed. Rena saw it before anything else happened. The numbers shifted, the patterns changed, and for just a moment, everything spiked in a way that made her breath stop. Then it leveled out. Then it corrected. Then the curse signature, which she had been tracking for weeks, disappeared from his readings entirely. She set down her tablet very carefully. She put her face in both hands for approximately 10 seconds. Then she stood up and said in a voice that was very steady, "Dohyun, the readings have changed." Dohyun was sitting in the chair beside the monitoring equipment. He looked at her. "The curse is gone," she said. He didn't move for a moment. Then he looked at his hands. The ache in his chest, the constant settled weight behind the sternum presence that had been there every hour of every day since the ritual chamber, was gone. Absent. The space where it had lived was simply space again, and his body was his again, and the silence in his chest where the curse had been was the most extraordinary thing he had ever felt. He put one hand flat on his knee. He breathed in. Taeyong found out 4 minutes later. He had been in the corridor outside, as he often was, and Rena opened the door and told him, and he did something that he would later insist was not crying, which was not supported by any of the available evidence. He pressed both hands against his face and turned away and made sounds that were definitely not crying. "I told you," Do-hyun said from inside the room. "You told me nothing," Taeyong said, in a voice that had several things happening to it at once. "You said it was a theory. You said longer was enough. You said—" "And I was right," Do-hyun said. Taeyong turned around. His face was doing everything at once. He crossed the room in 3 steps and put both hands on Do-hyun's shoulders and looked at him with an expression that had no clean name and said, "Yes, you were." Ara arrived at Halvern 14 days later. She came with a full escort, which was unusual for a quiet neutral station, and the escort was instructed to wait at the docking ring. She walked through the station with Nari and 2 guards, and found Do-hyun in his usual place, the East Corridor, doing his rounds, wearing his old boots. He stopped when he saw her. She stopped when she saw him. He looked good, better than she had seen him since the ritual. The lines around his eyes were lighter. He was standing at full height, with the easy steadiness that she had come to understand was simply how he existed in the world. He looked like a person who had been through something significant and had come out of it without flinching. She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You survived." "I did," he said. Rena's theory held. "It did," she said. And she said it the way Velshari said the things they meant most seriously. Directly, without decoration, looking straight at the person they were saying it to. He nodded. The ceremony was held the following week, on the station's largest public deck, which Taeyong had quietly arranged with the station's management, without telling anyone until the day before. It was not a large ceremony by Velshari standards, but it was a real one. Ara stood in her full ceremonial robes, with her power fully present around her, and she spoke the formal words that had not been spoken in a very long time, the conferring of the title Vetharon to a person outside the Velshari. It had no military rank, it gave no political power, it came with no territory, no wealth, no command structure. It meant only, "We know what you are, we know what you did. We will not forget." Do-hyun stood straight and still while she spoke the words, the way he stood for everything, without performance, without making himself smaller or larger than he was. When she was finished, she placed one hand over the center of his chest, where the curse had been, and she held it there for a moment. The gesture meant something specific in Velshari tradition that most of the aliens present recognized, and the humans present did not. But the understanding moved through the room anyway, the way some things did, without needing translation. Nari bowed to him. It was a small bow, formal and precise. Coming from Nari, it was the size of a mountain. Taeyong was in the back of the room and was definitely, absolutely, completely not crying. Rena was taking readings, because Rena was always taking readings, but her eyes were warm. After the ceremony, a reporter from one of the interspecies press agencies approached Do-hyun and asked him what he wanted people to know about what had happened at Halvern. The story had spread by then, not accurately, not completely, but it had spread the way stories did, and people had questions. Do-hyun thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "Someone needed help. I helped. That's it." The reporter pressed him. "But the sacrifice, the cost, how do you explain making that choice?" He looked at the reporter steadily. "I didn't think of it as a sacrifice," he said. "I just thought someone was dying, and I could do something about it. So I did." He walked away. The galaxy would spend years arguing about what had happened at Halvern. Diplomats would write papers about it. Philosophers would debate the implications. The Velshari would add it to their records in the formal language reserved for things that mattered. Humans, when asked, would say the same thing every time. Someone needed help. We helped. That is what we do. And the stars, old and cold and impossibly far away, had no comment. Because the stars had seen species rise and fall across a span of time that made the whole argument very small. But even the stars, if they could have spoken, might have said this: in all that time, in all that space, there was something about the humans that was difficult to explain and impossible to ignore. They were not the strongest, they were not the oldest, they were not the most powerful or the most gifted or the most feared. But they moved toward the thing that was falling. Every time, without fail, without being asked, and that in the end was the thing that mattered most.